Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 16th of May. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm with CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, the CEC's budget solution: forget money, fix the economy. And Fascist Liberals, ALP and Greens gang up to protect their political monopoly. So first, the CEC's budget solution: forget money, fix the economy. Craig, the budget was handed down this week. It proved what we knew, that our current government intends to go down the path of austerity.
And most of the people who are watching this program, Robbie, would have known that before the last election we had already forecast that this was the direction that they were going to take.
Yep, and we're exactly, and the Joe Hockey quote we gave last week, we'd read it out last year, and Hockey gave that speech in 2012. They have the same philosophy as the people that are running the financial crisis in Europe, right? Which is just slash everything so that the government has to pay out in social services for the benefit of people doesn't get in the way of any obligations to the banking system, etc. Right? Let's go through a little bit of the items though, because any one of them you might think, there's always a justification for any one of them, but taken as a whole, what you really see that this is a package that's going to hurt people, and this is just the beginning. Joe Hockey actually said that. So first, if you're a corporation, you got a tax cut, 1.5%, which I think brings down the corporate tax to 27.5% now. And the Innes Willix of the Australian Industry Group, I heard him on radio the next day saying, well, London's got a 20% corporate tax rate, and if we want to be internationally competitive, that's where we've got to head. Oh, whoopee, right? So if you keep doing that and slashing the taxes on all these usually multinational corporations that dominate our economy, then the people are going to be paying through their nose forever. And as Craig, it's not as if the corporations pay that much tax anyway.
No, the large corporations usually use tax havens and so forth, and there's a whole discussion about shadow banking, for example.
No, exactly.
How big corporations, don't pay that rate of tax.
Yep. So corporate tax cut 1.5%, $20 billion for the financial markets as a gift. What does that mean? Well, the government is going to create a $20 billion pool that, like the Future Fund, they're going to invest in the financial markets. Now, the Future Fund is, I think, about $90 billion now, and that's invested in shares in the banks and shares in cigarette companies and shares in foreign gun manufacturers and all kinds of things, right? Actually, when SPC asked for $26 million investment earlier this year, Joe Hockey said, oh, no way, we'd have to borrow that money. Well, no, they wouldn't. That's already in the Future Fund. They could have easily done that. Well, they want to create that. They like that model. Peter Costello actually runs the Future Fund now. They like that model. So they're going to create this pool of $20 billion to also be run by Peter Costello, invest in the stock market. But it's a good thing because $1 billion of that a year on its returns will be invested in medical research, right? Oh, it's so wonderful. Well, on the face of it, Craig, the medical research is going to get a lot less than the boost to the stock market, right? But it's going to be funded through what? A $7 Medicare co-payment and an extra $5 every time you buy your medicine, so an impost on medicines, which is going to hit the sick and the elderly who have chronic problems very hard, right? We're going to have lower pensions thanks to this budget through inflation indexing. Now that's worth explaining a little bit. Currently, pensions are indexed to average weekly earnings, which rise at a higher rate than inflation rises. But Craig, that's not the problem. The problem is the inflation rate, the inflation index, is a fraud. The actual cost of living, the necessities you buy at the supermarket, your vegetables and etc., go up much faster than the inflation rate. Right, so by linking pensioners, already linking them to average weekly earnings wasn't keeping pace with the real cost of living. By linking pensions to the inflation rate, pensioners are going to fall way behind the actual cost of living. Right, so this is actually, forget when they say, oh, this means they're going to grow less quickly. No, this is in real terms, this is a cut to pensions by doing this. But they're going to increase the price of fuel by also linking to the inflation rate, and that you can't compare that to what I just said about the inflation rate, because at the moment the price of fuel is not indexed to the inflation rate. So all these, and what's fuel? One of those things that no one can do without. They like making sure, like the GST, everyone gets hit by this. If you're under 30, you get no dole for 6 months if you lose your job, right? Which is quite a difficult situation. Why? Because where are these jobs? I mean, this is the obvious thing here when they, whoever works out these kind of policies on a computer model, saying, if you take this incentive away, then you're going to force them to go in this direction. Well, you've got to have jobs for people to go to. Youth unemployment in Australia is very, very high. And then on top of cutting out the benefit if they can't get a job, they're going to give now I'm calling this the $10,000 subsidy to Bunnings and Masters. Because, they're the two big... If you go to Bunnings and Masters, Craig, and no reflection on the people there, but Bunnings and Masters like to employ people over the age of 50. Right, because
they know what they're talking about.
They've had a bit of experience, etc. Yeah. Right, so there's plenty of them working Bunnings and Masters, and from now on, Bunnings and Masters will get a $10,000. Coles and Woolworths, who own Bunnings and Masters, will get a $10,000 subsidy for employing older people, and anyone else who does. But that's also extra pressure on the youth who will be competing for those jobs as well. Right, so when you add all that up and you look at this government, when it comes down to policies to benefit the banks, to allow them to gamble on a property bubble, etc., they get carte blanche, whereas the people are really going to be paying through this kind of budget. And like I said, it's only the beginning. So there's a lot of screaming about it. We're not trying to scream about it because we're the victims here, right? We're trying to. What we want to talk about is that this kind of budget does nothing for the economy, right? But one of the things that the first thing that's being screamed about is the broken promises. And I want to highlight, though, are we really that surprised that Tony Abbott broke his promise? Well, the only thing that's surprising is the sincerity with which he made that promise. Because, the old joke, how do you tell a politician's lying? His lips are moving. Well, Tony Abbott came across as quite a bit more sincere than that. So listen to Abbott. So this is on the 30th of August, 2013, last year, just as the election at the height of the election campaign, actually. So this is on radio, ABC Radio 3LO here in Melbourne, to John Fain. And this is what he said.
If we do win the election and we immediately say, we got it all wrong, we've now got to do all these different things, we will instantly be just as bad as the current government has been, and I just refuse to be like that.
Right, it's so sincere. You could hear the sincerity in that voice, right? It's so sincere. And now, he's in government, totally different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
All right, well, this is not unique to the Liberals. I want to highlight a quote from Dr. Andrew Lee. Now, Dr. Andrew Lee is someone that I've paid attention to for a while, Craig, because he's a former ANU economics professor, actually, who's now in Parliament on the Labor side. He's the Assistant Shadow Treasurer, and he's an up-and-comer for Labor. So one of the things that Labor is really attacking this Medicare co-payment, and so they should. Labor invented Medicare. It's supposed to be universal healthcare free. Put aside the fact that in the early 1990s, Bob Hawke proposed a Medicare co-payment, right? So that undermines Labor saying this is so sacred to them, right? Because it really isn't. But even someone in their current ranks, this Dr. Andrew Lee, look what he said. This is in 2003. In a paper when he was at Harvard University, he said, quote, "But there's a better way of operating a health system, and the change should hardly hurt at all. As economists have shown, the ideal model involves a small co-payment, not enough to put a dent in your weekly budget, but enough to make you think twice before you call the doctor." Right? So, these guys, when they're in government now or in opposition now, and in fact, in opposition, they're everyone's best friend. Abbott was our best friend in opposition. The current Labor government is our best friend in opposition. When they get into government, right, they're serving a different master. They're not serving the people. This is not real democracy in action. They're not serving the people. They're serving the different master. Because it's bigger than just breaking promises, right? It goes to the reality of who do these guys serve. So they have no credibility at all, and either side, and that's what makes this kind of, when Abbott announces this kind of budget, in terms of the fight to get this kind of budget through, the biggest thing in his favour is the opposition's lack of credibility, right? So, with that said, we want to talk about a real credible opposition. We are a credible opposition.
That's right, Robbie. Yeah.
Right? So, when we come back, let's talk about what we would do in this kind of budget situation. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So Craig, before the break we were talking about the budget and the fact that this is a vicious budget, Abbott's ready to ram through. Who's going to be the opposition to it? Labor cannot be. They will claim to be, but they've got no credibility, and so the population sees through that. We are. So I've got two questions. Overall, first, an overarching one, when it comes to this budget issue, isn't the economy the real issue, not the budget per se? And second, if you were running the government, what would you do to fix the economy?
Well, let's take the issue of the economy first, Robbie. Why do you have an economy? I mean, these days it's to have bankers and to look after the banks and the large corporates, right? And everyone else is so-called going to be affected indirectly through a trickle-down effect, depending on how healthy the banking system is or how healthy the corporate sector is or business, right?
Yeah, seemingly everyone is a cost to the economy,
right?
Except the bankers.
That's the monetary system, right? That's not what we see in the way of an economy. You've got to come back to the idea of the philosophical idea of what a real economy is, and that is to support the general welfare and the development of the population. Now, right throughout Australian history, we've had this trend, this tendency within the population, particularly within the old Labor Party, where you had the original union movement supporting the principles of the general welfare. So everything, in a sense, was subordinated towards how do you increase the general welfare of the population as a whole, as a principle.
That's the purpose of the economy.
That is the purpose of the economy. People are the purpose of the economy, the development of the population for the future posterity of generations of people. So what do? Well, we've had a monetary system take over in the last 40 years, and there's many, many, many people, particularly the younger generations, have no conception of anything except the post-Mont Pelerin-inspired economic rationalism programs of fascist economic policy. That's what this is. And most people have no idea. So when they look at the budget, they're measuring things inside a certain bubble of economic monetarist policy. And what we say is there is another alternative, the one that works, that actually says we're going to support people. And that's what we call generically the American system of political economy. It was used by the likes of Franklin Roosevelt, and if you go back before that, Abraham Lincoln, where they actually, first of all, you take Roosevelt, he put the bankers in their place.
Yep.
And we talk about glass-steagall. Now, glass-steagall was a law brought in 1933 in order to deal with a huge amount of speculation in the banking system. The same criminality that we have today in the banking system through the speculative instruments that are being used is the same criminality that he was fighting back in the 1930s.
And because it had just crashed, Craig, what was no one could argue with was this pile of speculation had so sapped the real wealth out of the economy that when the speculation crashed, there was nothing left, right? Yep. And Roosevelt had to address that. And the last thing he was going to do was give the bankers back the reins over the economy.
And that's the point we have to start with. Okay, you have to have a government that says, no, we are the government, we're governing in the general welfare and the general interest of the people. Now, that's a catchphrase that's thrown out by Hocking and these guys, we're going to look after future generations. It's a complete lie because they're not interested in the actual generations of people, and the policies prove it, right? Okay, what do? Glass-Steagall. You separate out the commercial banking system that you need, but you control it. You regulate it. You regulate how housing loans are given out so they're not speculated upon. You regulate how loans are given and all that sort of thing. And you allow the merchant banking and the speculative investment banking side of things to go their own way. They can still exist, but they're not going to have access to bailouts or bail-ins or depositors' funds.
Now, Craig, as we discussed last week, the current volume of speculation in Australia adds up to $135 trillion, which can only be that big because it's actually leaching wealth out of the real economy. So with what you were talking about with Glass-Steagall, you cut that speculation off from that wealth, and that wealth then stays in the economy.
Yeah, well, you want to talk about taxes? Let's bring in a new tax, call it a speculation tax, a 0.1% tax on all financial transactions to do with speculation, right? that would raise, as we pointed out, 135 thereabouts billion per year just there, but it also killed the cancer.
Yep.
It'll irradiate the cancer, if you want to use a similar sort of term. No, but you can't just go that far, Robbie. You've got to have a regulated banking system, but it has to be controlled. And that means you have to have a strong national bank, a bank that acts in the interest of the general welfare, just like the Commonwealth Bank did during World War II under the influence of old Labor Party stalwarts like Chifley and Curtin. Now that bank showed how it could control the private banks through all the different regulations that it had to bring in during the war years. You do that again and you create enormous amounts of credit. Now last week we showed graphs, and we can show that graph quickly on screen again, about how the Commonwealth Bank was used to create the credit necessary to prosecute the war. Now that's what you do again.
If you do it for war, you can do it for peace.
And the point is that you have to have large amounts of credit issued into the development of high quality infrastructure. Now, quickly, if you look at the Sydney Harbour Bridge as an example, now that cost around about £10 million to build, right, and $500 million in today's terms. But think about Sydney without the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Think about the access from the northern suburbs without tunnels, without that bridge. And look about the commerce, look about the amount of, the amount of economic activity you would not have within the economy.
And efficiencies you would have.
Efficiencies. And the role of infrastructure, Robbie, is to increase the overall economic activity within your economy. Now, if you take our proposal for high-speed rail, right, a high-speed magnetic levitation train system that can travel at 400 or 500 kilometres per hour, how far would you need, if you were to sit in a train for half an hour, that type of train, where would you be? You'd be 200, 300, 400 kilometres north
of Melbourne.
Of Melbourne.
Maybe halfway to Sydney and halfway.
Right, so you could have cities developed for 3 hours by mag-lev from Melbourne where people could commute to the cities if they needed to. But you could create literally cities that have an economic vein through high-speed magnetic levitation trains outside the city areas. Which, what would that do? That would mean you'd be able to open up vast areas of land to provide people with cheap housing. If it was all funded through national banking, such you had a program to get away from the overpriced speculative industry which is now in the housing bubble, then you could actually develop sane cities. Now, that would mean you'd increase the economic activity right along that corridor, right? So you increase the economy by using strategically placed infrastructure. And we published a lot of these ideas back in 2002 and then republished them again in 2006. Because without doing that, you end up in fascist government. In fact, that was the title of our New Citizen back down in 2002, and we're spot on the mark. So large-scale infrastructure development means you employ people in good quality jobs, large numbers of people in good quality jobs. Therefore, you increase the economic pie that you can actually then use to service the rest of the economy.
Yep, and that's how you grow an economy.
So three things in summary: glass-steagall, going with national bank, and then large-scale strategic infrastructure projects. It's not that difficult to do, Robbie, but you have to first start with a commitment to the general welfare and this idea that the role of government is not to serve the banks, as we see with Labor and Liberal on both sides of the fence, and the Greens. Yep. The point is you have to have a commitment to the general welfare. And that's what we represented for the last 25 years.
Thanks very much, Craig. Well, on that note of fascism, as you just mentioned, when we come back, we're going to talk about that as a joint policy of Labor, Liberal and the Greens right now. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, Fascist Liberals, ALP and Greens gang up to protect political monopoly. Now, Craig, before I actually talk specifically about that, I want to plug Executive Intelligence Review magazine. The very latest edition here has a dossier, fact sheet, British Imperial Project in Ukraine. And this is about a 30-page dossier that actually proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that the government of Ukraine and the uprising in Ukraine that the West is backing is actually Nazis, right? So the most threatening sort of immoral image you can think of, that's what's taken over, and we in the West are backing that, and it's a real crime, and the consequences are going to be huge because it's provoking Russia into a war that could become a bigger war. But we've been talking about this for a long time. I just wanted to mention that people can call in to the CEC on 1800 636 432 if they've been following the Ukraine story, and get a free copy of that dossier. All right, but I have to mention that the major parties in Australia all support those fascists in Ukraine. We've been trying to scream about it, but they're also anti-Putin and anti-Russia, that, oh no, we support them. Well, not surprisingly, because in reality, they're fascists themselves. So the Australian Parliament has just agreed, or the major parties in Parliament have agreed, Craig, on rules to make it harder for parties other than the Coalition, the ALP and the Greens to contest elections. And this is not about the ballot, the size of the ballot, Senate ballot paper, right? These kind of decisions should not be based on that. This is about a simple fact. You do have this mushrooming of all these extra parties, true. Why? Because the major parties, the parties in there, do not represent the people, right? It's similar to what we were talking about
before. They represent
before.
the banking system, yes, right.
Exactly. Well, you've got, here are the people who just want to live and have a future. They've got the Liberals and Labor, who are happy to kill them with economic rationalism, or they've got the Labor and the Greens, who are happy to kill them with green fascism, right? I think Australia's overpopulated. Our local Labor Member of Parliament here, Calvin Thompson, he's part of this movement that wants to take us back to 6 million people, right? Well, they don't like people. So the people know that. And I wanted to point out, look at Clive Palmer, forget what Palmer stands for. He's demonstrated something, that if an alternative group actually gets media publicity, now he had to pay for it, he had the money to pay for it, but he got it. Because he got the publicity, he got the support. And that's what the guys that are in there, Labor, Liberal and the Greens, are afraid of, right? So what's their response? To them, Craig, it's like the people are the barbarians at the gate, right? And they're going to pull up the drawbridge, and now we're going to lock in what's already in there with this these new rules for the parliamentary system. And I was part of a high-level meeting in Canberra a couple of months ago that I saw in Technicolor the way the system in there thinks. So we were talking to a very high-ranking advisor to this government, and we just happened to make the point, look, the Australian people are scared about the future of the economy. That's the point we made. And his instant response was, why would they be? Right? He, on his few $100,000 a year job, thinks everything's great.
Yes.
And that really showed us how out of touch they are. So, but Craig, clearly the CEC is also being targeted by this move. Yeah. What are we going to do about it?
Well, Robbie, the point is that you have so many different groups that are now being affected by these austerity measures. They need to join us in order to effectively fight it. For 25 years, we've never deviated from the policies of supporting the general welfare, of fighting for the real development of Australia, of establishing a national bank. And people have to start to act now, join us, become an associate member, begin to learn how to organise in their local area and increase our membership base. Now, we don't fall into the same category as a lot of these other micro parties because we've been around for 25 years and we have a substantial support base across Australia. What the government's doing is saying to be registered as a political party you need to have 1,500 members, which is triple what it was with the 500 members, because they want to eliminate a lot of these small parties. Like I said, we're not in the same boat. We intend to organise the socks off the Australian people in order to realise, wake up, these policies are going to kill you. You've been duped so many times in the past. Look at our record. We've never deviated from what we've said. You may not like it because we're not populist and we upset your populist views, but if you don't want to stick by us, you're basically going to be annihilated by these policies that are coming down.
So we're on the beginning of a membership drive. If you're a supporter of the CEC, call in and become a member. We'll have to leave it there. Thanks, Craig. Thanks for tuning into this week's CEC Report.